Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Clint Stone Chapter 11, The Pit, written by some guy named Ted. I stood on the bridge of the Golden Hound along with the rest of the crew, looking at the view screen at the largest ship that I'd ever seen in my life. To call it enormous would not do it justice. The ship was titanic, gargantuan. It was what looked like every single ounce of metal in several systems bundled together in one mass. Easily 9 miles long and a mile high, it could have comfortably held the populations of several outer rim planets. And it was only one of 8. It was the largest of them, but the rest were not much smaller, the smallest being several miles in length. Surrounding the 8 supercarriers were a vast multitude of smaller ships. The largest of those were more than a mile in length. Those were the carriers and the battleships of numerous other, smaller, personal craft. When all of this was considered, the amount of beings in those hundreds of ships was equal to one of the outer garden worlds, numbering in the hundreds of millions. The beings here outnumbered the rebellion 2 to 1. This was the free fleet of Azrekahl. But for all the ships, all the beings, this fleet was only a fraction of the numbers the Swarm had at their command. Realizing that, I fully understood for the first time what we were up against. The Swarm military numbered in the billions, and we were less than a fraction of their number, many of whom were non-combatants. "Is that a Kramer-class supercarrier?" Clint asked, an awe evident in his voice. "I didn't know that those still existed. I thought the Swarm tore them all apart for scrap after the conquest of Azrekahl." "As far as we know," Lady Knight said, "this is the only Chimera still in operation." I saw Clint's eyes widened. "It has to be 100 years old. How would they even get their hands on one?" "I don't know," said the lady. "Perhaps you can ask one of them after we get them to sign the treaty." She had returned to her hard manner soon after breakfast. The closer we got to the free fleets, the more she grew colder and harsher until it was just as if she had not changed from when we had first met her in Scour's office. Clint had melted her icy exterior, but it had refrozen harder than ever. She had emerged from her quarters dressed in a scarlet and purple uniform of a diplomat, the edges chased with gold to provide a slight flair to the uniform. It worked. Her long black hair was pulled back sharply in a single braid to the back of her head. "Karis, hail the high realm and tell them Lady Knight has returned for negotiation." "Yes, ma'am," the skeleton said, turning to the communications array. She turned to us. "Go make yourselves presentable. Weapons are allowed." We looked at her. "What are you waiting for?" she said. "Go." We did as she said. I walked out of the bridge, waiting for Clint to pass through the door before me. As soon as we got out of earshot, I asked him, "Was she that commanding last night?" "A gentleman does not kiss and tell," he said, and that was the end of that. When Clint did not want to talk about something, nothing could get him to say one more word than he wanted to. Once in our room, we heaved our bags onto our respective beds and rummaged through for our clothes. Each of us had several pairs of clothes that we only wore when we were expecting them to be stained with blood. Clint had his brown pants, leather boots, red shirt and long overcoat, and his brown hat. He loved that thing. I had a pair of deep blue, almost black pants, cut loose to allow for my fur, and a plain, dark green shirt. I did not wear boots unless we wore our suits, which we were going to do. We wore tight suits under our clothing to conceal our advantage. After the clothing, I placed my gun belt on my waist, 2 inches wide, made out of a dark brown leather. It held a holster on both hip and had several slots for knives, which I filled. It was a well-crafted piece, bought in one of the more prestigious gun shops in an independent system. While we dressed, I attempted a conversation. "Lady Knight has changed since we met her," I said to Clint. "I remember when she was making doe eyes at you at her father's feast. And he kicked us out because I kissed her hand. Yeah, that was an eventful day. I guess that she's grown up. Her father is a leader in the rebellion, and her homeworld is occupied by the Swarm." "When did that happen?" I asked. I hadn't heard anything about the Petunas Major being invaded. "Oh, a few weeks after we were there. Some Swarm sympathizers staged a coup and took out the central government. They surrendered to the Swern, and soon as the puppet government was installed. Her name isn't Lady Knight, and that's just her title. Her name is Jane. Clint looked at me and raised a finger under my nose. Don't ever call her that, though. She will kill you. Stick with Lady Knight or ma'am, and you'll survive. Maybe. He smiled wistfully. She got quite a temper if you rile her up. I could not believe my ears or eyes. They were telling me that Clint Stone had feelings for this woman, and that he was in love. How did... The ship jumped, and I threw my arms out to balance. Clint sighed. We're here. Could have done a better job at the landing. We gathered in the common room. Lady Knight stood surrounded by an air of command, her eyes the exterior, glass tight. Clint and I strode in dressed in full battle attire. Lady Knight turned to us. Do not say anything, do not do anything unless I tell you. The treaty has been months in the making, and I will not see you mess it up. The door slid open, and I looked into the hangar of the High Realm. Like the rest of the ship, it was huge. There was enough room to fit hundreds of personal craft, which it had. From wall to wall, the ships of all styles and makes crammed together as tightly as possible. And from what I knew of the Chimera ships, this was only one of 6 hangars throughout the ship. Standing just outside the door was a collection of armed fighters. I would not call them soldiers, as they lacked the discipline and rigidity of soldiers, but they looked formidable nonetheless. Scythine stepped forward, looking decidedly less formidable. He was short and thin, and dressed in a light tan robe, a necklace with gold and red pendant hanging around its neck. He inclined his head in a slight bow as we left the Golden Hound and stepped onto the hard metal floor of the hangar. I could feel the rumble of the engines through the floor, a slight vibration that seemed to permeate the air. Welcome back, Lady Knight. Narachal Lurach is waiting for you. He glanced up at Clint and I, towering over everyone else in the room. You bodyguards, my lady, these are much more fearsome than the last 2. Why do you think I brought them? She was much friendlier with the Scythian than with us. Her voice was not as harsh or cold, but warm. I wondered suddenly if she changed her manner on purpose. I had an opportunity to meet several diplomats before, and they had all been masters of emotion and body language. That was one of the most important aspects of negotiation. Or so they told me. The warlord is waiting for you, said the Scythian. Come, I'll take you to him. Lady Knight followed him, and we followed close behind. I had never been a bodyguard before, but I knew the basics. Watch for weapons, avoid getting in the way of your charge, and above all else, look intimidating. That stopped most threats before they could even be a problem. And we were not here to be truly bodyguards. We were here to impress Narachal Lurach, which our size and reputation. We marched down the hangar, through a set of wide, plain metal doors, and down a large hallway. It fed into an even larger hallway, which cut through the center of the ship. This was the main highway, the central avenue of travel. In the middle of the highway was a series of rails, on which raced several transports. Metal tubes with enough room for hundreds of people. This was how people traveled quickly back and forth across the ship. Otherwise, it would take hours. The Scythian led us to the edge of the platform, and on one of the tubes stopped before us. It was occupied by several dozen beings, all of whom were herded off by the fighters without a word. The tube shot forward down the highway, traveling fast. There was no conversation other than Lady Knight and the Scythian discussing trivial matters. It sounded like 2 friends catching up. Clint and I stood back straight and arms folded before Lady Knight. I watched the left and Clint watched the right. The fighters watched us. I could see that they had been in their fair share of combat, and they looked like they knew how to use guns that they were carrying. The tube jerked to a halt, sending us stumbling off our balance. All but Lady Knight. She had the foresight to grip onto the side of the tube and was so unaffected by the change in speed. The doors slid open and we disembarked. Lady Knight stepped to the fore and Clint and I took our positions behind her. We stood before large metal stairs leading to the metal doors, made of what looked like bronze, covered in carvings of scenes of violence. We climbed the stairs and stood before the doors. Before we could walk in, the Scythian came around. "Your weapons, please," he said, hand outstretched palm upwards. "What is the meaning of this?" said Lady Knight. "You have never disarmed my guards before." The citizen smiled apologetically. "That was before last week. There was an incident, and now the warlord does not allow strangers to carry weapons in his presence." She sighed, sounding like she wanted to argue, but there was nothing that she could have done. She nodded at us. "Hand over your weapons." I looked at her, and she looked back. I unclipped my gun belt and placed it on the Scythian's hand. Clint did the same. The Scythian looked pointedly at Clint's metal arm. Clint stared at the Scythian, his face flat and emotionless. The Scythian swallowed and looked away. "Search them," he ordered, as the fighter behind me. I thought about refusing, but that would have not been helpful to Lady Knight. I held my arms out and the fighter frisked me, finding nothing. He missed the knives up my sleeve. Clint was searched as well, and the fighter found several of his hidden knives. Not all. It was laughable to think that they thought his harmless after they disarmed us. I could have taken them all out, weapons or no weapons, and Clint could likely account for the ship. When we had been searched, the Scythian opened the doors. We were marched into the throne room. That was the only way to describe it. Broad and deep, the room was lit by torches, of all things. Large pillars stood in the 2 rows of either side of the center, forming a path to the dais at the back of the room. On the side of the dais was an imposing block of bronze shaped in the form of a chair. As we drew closer, I could see that there were carvings in the chair that matched those on the door. Seated in the bronze throne was a hulking Urg, 7 feet tall, muscles bounding with the razor teeth and claws. Urg were the sole subjects of the Swarm Empire. The Urg know nothing but violence and death, taught to them at a young age. Every adult Urg was conscripted into the Swarm army as a shock trooper, used for those situations where the Swarm do not care about collateral damage. That there was an Urg here was a bad sign, but I'd seen the Swarm in a rebellion, and I suppose that an Urg could be part of the free of the Empire as well. The bronze door slammed behind us. With a dull boom I could feel in my chest. I looked around and I saw thousands of beings seated in risers around the throne room. They looked down at us with a hunger I did not like. I turned to Lady Knight, about to ask what we should do, but her gaze was focused on the Urg on the throne. "Where is Warlord Azrekahl?" she asked, her voice the same icy tone as when she spoke with us. The Urg laughed, a rasping, grating sound that sounded very much like a cracking bone. He stood and his booming voice filled the throne room. "I am Warlord now. Azrekahl has betrayed that which the fleeters hold dear, and so he has been condemned to the pit." He gave a wide, toothy grin. He was very well articulated for an Urg. Most of them can't even string more than a couple words together in a sentence. That is not to say that Urg was stupid. They were fiends on the battlefield, understanding more about fighting than most beings. But when it came to the gentler side of intelligence, they tended to be lacking. "Why?" Lady Knight asked. "What did he do?" "He sought to join us to a group of planet dwellers who wished to only use us as ships. You and your rebellion." The Urg stood high on the dais and looked out over the crowd gathering in the stands. "We are the Free Fleet. We bow to no government or ruler." The crowd jeered loudly, and the Urg raised its arms to quiet them. He cast his gaze down towards Lady Knight and Clint and I. "We will not help you or any other government, and they need to be reminded of that. Bring the pilot." The crowd murmured loudly, and a few cheers broke out. Clint and I looked at each other and moved closer to Lady Knight. I watched the fighters surrounding us. They had wide grins on their faces, and their hands caressed their guns, as if they expected to use them soon. This was bad. We were in the center of a room with no cover and surrounded by over 100 fighters. If it had just been Clint and I, we could have dealt with them. But it wasn't just Clint and I. We had Lady Knight to worry about. She would be no help in a fight, and we would have to cover her from the plasma fire. From hundreds of guns, the fire would overload our suits and we would fry. The crowd roared. I looked around, seeking an object of their attention. I saw Karolis being led through the small door. He was pushed up onto the dais and forced to his knees before the Urg. He had clearly been struck on the head as he was swaying back and forth, forcing his captors to hold him up. The Yerg stood over Karis, nearly twice his height. He looked down at us. "Your rebellion needs a message sent to them. We will not be bought as mercenaries or join any cause other than our freedom." He said, "Will do nicely." Lady Knight stepped forward, her face panicked. "You can't do that," she cried out. "Aunt?" asked the Yerg, his deep voice soft. "There is nothing you can do about it. Nothing your rebellion can do about it. You have no ships, remember? That's why you wanted to enslave us." "We were not going to enslave you. We wanted to work with you, to make an alliance," she said. She glanced at Karis, rocking on his knees. "We made a mistake. We insulted your honor, and I apologize. Let us leave, and we will forget this happened." The Yerg seemed to think it over. His face contracted thoughtfully for a moment, and then twisted with fresh rage. "But then how will we send a message? You could tell them, but I find the head is a much more powerful message." With that, he dragged his large claws across Karis's neck. He stepped backwards to avoid the spray of blood that covered the floor in front of Karis. The fighters holding Karis's body let it drop limply to the floor. "No!" screamed Lady Knight in an anguish much more powerful than that of a diplomat or a pilot. The Yerg smiled again, his eyes lighting up. His claws were red as he lifted them high into the air. "You three are going to be tonight's entertainment." "Clear the floor," he ordered the fighters behind us. The fighters backed off, guns trained on us to prevent us from following. The crowd started to chant, "The pit, the pit, the pit." Clint and I stood close to Lady Knight as we could. She was oblivious to everything other than Karis's body, lying in a slowly expanding pool of blood. It reached the edge of the dais and dripped off, forming a little stream of red down the steps. I watched in every direction that I could, ready to defend against the first strike, no matter from where it came. But no one came. I glanced around. The fighters had backed away into a large circle, leaving us in the center. Where was the threat? I could not see one. The floor dropped out from underneath us, and we fell into darkness. My head struck something solid, and my thoughts ceased. Ch.11 lay on the ground. "No, it's too hard to be earth. Rock?" Her hand touched a hard surface. Metal. It came flooding black in a rush. The floor had opened up and dropped her in here. She had hit the floor hard and lost consciousness. She sat up with a groan, opening her eyes, and then blinked, turning her head. She couldn't see anything. "Am I blind?" she thought with horror. No, she could see the speck of light high above her. No doubt the floor that she had fallen through. No sooner had she seen that it disappeared. She tried to stand, but the sudden movement made her head spin. There was a noise to her left, a boot scraping across the floor. "Hello, Clint, TEDx She stopped, realizing that he was dead. Damn it, how did this happen? It had been a routine treaty signing. Nothing difficult. She had done that with hard stuff weeks ago. All that had been left to do was make it official. But it had gone terribly wrong. The ritual had been overthrown, the treaty was now smoke, and Karis was dead. He had been like a father to her. Ever since Cerberus had cut ties with her, Karis had been the one that she went to for advice or for help. Now he was dead. What am I supposed to tell Haru? She thought. Karis's son was just a boy. He had already lost his mother. He was an orphan now. It was almost enough to overwhelm her, but she refused to let it. She cut off her emotions and put her face into Hardface. The diplomats that had trained her called her Hardface the best that they'd ever seen. Jane would have been proud, but Hardface did not allow for emotion when negotiating with those who valued strength or with those who could not be allowed to see a weakness. Hardface was the best manner to assume. Jane found it was a good state of mind to be in when she needed to think logically and clearly. When she had seen Clint Stone standing there in the general's office, she had been so surprised to see him that she had assumed Hardface by instinct. She hadn't seen the human since her father's celebration feast. She had been a naive girl back then, easily impressed and very curious. The human had just been so different from the rest so she could not keep herself away. And now, on the hound, his words had been so, enough, she thought, focus on the problem at hand. She was in the dark and she had no way of knowing where she was. Well, she did know that she was under the throne room and that Clint and TEDx had fallen with her. Very likely the boot that had belonged to one of them, but they had not answered. She quieted her breathing, listening carefully. Breathing came from the direction of the boot scrape, ragged and harsh. It was not Clint or TEDx. She did not move and tried to breathe as quietly as possible. The breathing moved below her feet and passed by, accompanied by more boot scuffling. Whoever the boot belonged to had a slight limp, causing them to drag their foot with every step. The sounds faded into the distance. She waited for several minutes after she heard the noise fade away, and then pushed herself up again. This time she was not overwhelmed with dizziness and could stand. She did so, feeling the muscles in the back tense momentarily after her falling a dozen feet, but she ignored them. Hard-faced was good for ignoring a lot of things. Now, I just need to find my way out of here. Jane put her hand out in front of her and walked slowly forward, moving carefully to avoid running into anything too fast. Her hand touched metal. She ran her hand along it, smooth like the walls of the rest of the ship. She placed her hand along it and walked. There was no way that she was going to get out of here if she just stayed put. I awoke, my head pounding. I opened my eyes and I saw a tiny sliver of light far above me. It winked out, leaving me in total darkness. I sat up, my head spinning. I waited for it to pass, and then stood up. I managed to stay on my feet as a fresh wave of dizziness hit me. I put out my arm to steady myself and found it against a wall. I leaned against it and felt my head. I did not feel any blood, but there was a large bump above my right ear. I inhaled, and my nose assaulted me with particularly nasty scent. I coughed and called out, "Clint, are you down here?" "Yeah," came the reply. "Give me a second. I'll just get us some light." Light? Where the hell was he going to get light? A narrow blue beam blazed into existence. The plasma blade on his hand glowed, illuminating the room that we found ourselves in. Narrow and short, there wasn't much in it, other than several skeletons and one particularly decayed body in the corner. That explained the smell. "What the hell happened down here?" I asked. Clint walked, and I could see him in the light of his glowing hand. "Well, that Erg called this place the Pit. I'm guessing some kind of gladiator murder maze type thing. So you have no idea?" "Pretty much, yeah." He looked around, lifting his hand to get a better light in the room. "Where is Jane?" I looked around. "I don't know." Clint didn't say a word, just ran out of the room and into the corridor outside. I followed, and we ran down the hallway shouting Jane's name. "Well," Clint did. I shouted Lady Knight. The hallway looked like it hadn't seen light for a very long time. Mold and rust coated the walls and bodies littered the floors in various stages of decay. The smell was awful. We rounded a corner and Clint almost ran over a being who was crawling on the ground. It looked up at the light and fell backwards, hissing and covering its eyes in pain. It was clearly not Lady Knight, and so we ignored it and ran past. There were more important things to be looking for. Our voices echoed down the hallway as we shouted for Lady Knight. Over the sound of our shouting, I could hear a faint noise. I told Clint. We slowed and stopped yelling. The noise grew louder. It had a rhythmic thump to it. Thump, thump, thump. I strained to figure out what exactly would make that noise. It sounded like boots. As I made the connection, light spilled out of the doorways and into the hall, and a squad of fighters gathered around us. They gave a roar and attacked us. There were only 5 of them. I slipped one of my knives out of my sleeves and threw it, burying it hilt deep into the fighter's neck. They were on us. Clint took out 2 of them with a single swipe of his plasma knife, and, after a few seconds of maneuvering, I managed to knock the 4th one on his back and crushed his windpipe with a stomp. The last fighter turned and ran. He didn't get very far. I pulled my knife smoothly from the throat of the first fighter and sent it sailing into the fleeing fighter's back. He collapsed, arms reaching behind him in a sharp pain. He didn't struggle long. Are they gone? I spun at the voice that came from behind us. I saw a thin, ragged Raccoon walking towards us, dragging his leg slightly. He peered around us and got closer. His eyes widened as he saw the body stretched out on the floor. He looked at us, eyes reflecting the light of Clint's plasma and the fallen lights of the fighters. That's far enough, Clint said. Who are you, and what is this place? The Raccoon stopped. His breathing sounded harsh and forced, even from here. My name is Azrekahl. Until recently, I was the warlord of this fleet. Now I am a resident of the pit. He leaned forward on his knees and coughed. I backed up slightly. I did not fear the danger of the fight, but sickness was another thing. That thought of something invisible could bring me down without giving me a chance to defend myself was horrifying. Azrekahl noticed and raised his hand. Do not worry, it's not contagious. Merely a combination of bad luck and poor genes. Despite what it may sound like, the Free Fleet is not a paradise. We have little in the way of medical care here. When you have blood disease, it's not pretty. Let's leave it at that. You're Azrekahl, Clint said. We came here looking for you, and the Yerg threw us down into the pit after killing a friend of ours. That sounds like a rack. He was once a trusted lieutenant, but when I got sick, he saw his chance and challenged me for leadership. I couldn't have beaten him healthily, but Garak always liked to be sure that he would win. That's great, Clint said, but we're looking for someone else who followed with us, a Batuni female. Perhaps you've seen her? Azrekahl shook his head. You don't see much down here in the pit, always dark unless fighters are down here. Do you know where she could be then? Clint asked, impatience clear in his voice. I did pass someone back in the antechamber, but that could have been... Where? Clint said. Where is it? That way, said Azrekahl, pointing his thumb over his shoulder. Clint took off at a dead sprint down the hallway, leaving me and Azrekahl standing by ourselves in the light of a fallen fighter's lanterns. I picked one up and sighed. You might as well follow me. If Clint does find Lady Knight, she'll want to talk to you. Lady Knight? Why did you say so? Grak threw her down here as well. That bastard, said Azrekahl. He limped quickly down the hallway, following the direction Clint had gone. I followed. Jane stumbled blindly through the dark. She had lost contact with the wall, and now she walked around trying to find it again. Her foot struck something, and she fell. She threw her arms out to catch herself and landed on her palms, preventing her face from hitting the metal. She pushed herself to her knees and felt back for what she had tripped on. Her hand touched something cold and hard. She patted it, trying to figure out what it was. When her fingers touched her eye sockets, Jane knew that she had tripped over her skull. She recoiled. Scrambling backwards, she collided with a hard surface, and she knew that she had found the wall. She stood up, using the wall as support. She had lost her way, and she had lost contact with the wall. Not that I knew where I was going in the first place. She just put one foot in front of the other and walked down the wall. She went slowly, dragging her feet, not wishing to trip over any more bones. Her eyes strained uselessly to see anything in the darkness, but it was absolute, hiding everything. There was a flicker of light. She focused on it slowly, making her way towards it. She didn't know what it might mean, but it was better than the darkness. She heard talking. The accent sounded Gurkish. Then another voice, this time sounding Baywish. The light burst around the corner Jane hadn't even known was there, and she was blinded. She threw up her hand, blocking the light, squinting. She could see two figures standing in front of her. What do we have here, a job? Asked one of the Gurkish accent. Looks like a diplomat witch, said the other. Jane's eyes had adjusted enough that she could lower her hand. The two beings were fighters with large knives clutched in their hands and more on their belts. They looked at her with an evil expression etched into their faces. We'll have some fun with you, the Baywa growled. His eyes lit up with lust. What can I do? They've got weapons and I don't. Then she had to get one. She assumed the allure face, a manner designed to overwhelm her opposite with lust that clouded their judgment. Usually, she could only use it on males, but several females had been known to fall for it. It was no trouble at all to bewitch these two. It was a dangerous game to play, though, when they were intent on hurting you, but she only needed to distract him for a moment. "Oh, please do," she said in a sultry, breathy tone. "I have never been with someone as strong as you before." It was a lie. Clint had been the strongest being that she'd ever known, and he was much stronger than these two. But they didn't know that, and her words and manner worked very well on them. She slinked closer to the bearer, reaching her arms up and running them across his chest. "Ooh, so big. Is the rest this big?" she asked and slid her hand down his stomach, his eyes filled with pleasure. Then they flared up with pain as Jane squeezed, and he hunched over and received a knife to the stomach. While he had been distracted, Jane had pulled the knife from the bolt and plunged it into his gut. Once, twice, 3 times. He fell backwards, hands clasping in his stomach. They were soon wet with blood, but she would not concern herself with him. Even if he didn't die, he was out of the equation. Now she had to worry about the Gurk. That might be a problem, but she had combat experience and the Gurk looked like he had plenty, but there was nothing for it. She held the knife high in a ready position. I hope it's a ready position. She had several of her bodyguards practicing with them, and she tried to imitate their stance, with wide feet, bent knees, square shoulders, and arms tight to her body. Nice attempt at the stance, but it could use some work. "I'll teach you if you want." The voice came from behind the Gurk, deep and smooth like honey over rocks. She knew that voice. Clint Stone stepped into the light of the fighter's lantern, with a wide grin on his face. "Miss me?" he asked, looking at Jane. She looked at him blankly, and then the Gurk, who was still registering the giant who had appeared behind him. His brain seemed finally to accept that and lunged at Clint. Clint sidestepped and brought his arm down on the Gurk's head in one smooth motion. Jane could hear the crack of the bones. "Are you all right?" he asked, walking towards her. "They didn't hurt you, did they?" She shook her head, but he still looked her over, patting her up for wounds. "That better be what he's doing." "I'm fine," she said. She raised her chin and a dead Gurk. "I could have taken care of him." "Of course you could have," said Clint. He enfolded her in his big arms, giving her a strong hug. "I was worried." She hugged him back. She heard footsteps behind Clint and she pushed him away, looking around him for intruders. It was not more fighters, as she feared, but TEDx and a frail being that looked like... "Rachel, you're alive!" she exclaimed. "I thought the crack had killed you." "No, my lady, merely threw me in the pit. It would have been a death sentence, but it did not occur to him that after 20 years as a warlord of this fleet, I knew the inside of the ship like the back of my hand." Clint looked up. "Do you think you could get us out of the pit?" "I do know a way out, but it is blocked by several inches of steel. We can't get through." He cut off as Clint raised his hand and a blue blade extended from the tip of his finger. "I don't think that will be a problem. Can you get us to the hangar after I get us out?" "No. The only way out of here is directly through the throne room, and there is no way that we can sneak out of there without getting caught." Clint sighed. "Then there is no way out without a fight. I had hoped to avoid more violence than necessary." Jane spoke up. "There is a way. It is risky, but if it works, only one more has to die." "I'm listening," said Clint. Grak sat on his bronze wall throne. He had made it after he threw Rachel in the pit. The old bastard had deserved it. Death was too good for him. He had tried to sell the freedom of the fleet to the planet dwellers, and that could not be tolerated. He sat on his throne, lounged, really, and young, pretty Nera was cleaning the dried blood from his claws. It was good to be the warlord. Everyone did as he said, and he did not want for anything, but he was not content. When Rachel had been warlord, everyone did what he said without question. Grak had to threaten an order for anything to be done. He would have to work on that. But how? He could always make a few examples. Heads made good examples. The Skillen pilot's head was on its way to the rebellion as he sat there, and they would soon learn that no one made slaves out of the Free Fleet. The crowd murmured as the screen slowed and the 2 bodyguards, the tall pink being and the freakish Jahan, demolished the hunting squad. Grak watched with disinterest in his eyes. He had seen it all before. He had yet to see Oh, now that was interesting. The witch knight had managed to kill a job with a knife to his stomach. Grak hadn't thought that she had it in her, but there it was, on the screen hanging high from the ceiling for all to see. But she still had to deal with the Kadwa. No, there was that human. He said something, Grak did not know what, as the screen did not have sound, and then smashed the back of the Kadwa's head, and the Kadwa tried to attack. A formidable fighter, that human, and he was augmented with a metal hand of his. He leaned over to the side and spoke to his aide, one of several standing by to get anything he desired. "Send the next squad in." "Yes, sir," the aide said and rushed off. Grak turned back to the screen. What he saw now made him sit up straight, knocking the girl cleaning his claws out of the way. The last shot of the camera had of the residence of the pit was a large hole carved into a door leading up to Grak. He turned at the sound of the name and saw the human, the Juhan, Lady Witch, and Narachal standing to the left of his throne, by the entrance to the pit. The fighters in the room raced to surround them, guns leveled at their heads. The human had been the one to speak. He stood at the forefront of the group, head held high, defiance in his eyes. Grak hated defiance. He stood. "I see he escaped the pit. No matter, you'll die the same. Fill them with fire," he ordered the fighters surrounding the group. They shifted their aim and readied their weapons. "Wait," the human said again. The fighters did not fire. Grak became angry. They had not followed his orders. "The warlord of the fleet, I have something to say." Grak growled deep in his throat, the noise rumbling across the dais. "Words will not save you now, human. I've made up my mind to kill you, and you shall be killed. Shoot him," he ordered again. "I challenge you for leadership of the fleet," shouted the human. "You cannot deny the challenge." "I can if I wish," roared Grak. "I am the warlord of The crowd drowned him out, shouting, "Challenge! Challenge! Challenge!" They would pay, those treacherous beings. He could not deny the challenge now. If he did, he would look weak. After he crushed the human, he would see each and every audience member beheaded. It would send a message. Heads were always a good message. They got the point across. But he saw a way out. It was not that he did not wish to fight. It was that fighting was beneath him. Why fight yourself when you could have others do it for you? And that left him with the fun of the prisoners. "You are not one of the fleet," Grak roared. "You have no right to challenge me." "You call this the free fleet," replied the human. "They live in fear of you. You rule through fear and threats. There are people not free. They are enslaved by you, and I'm freer than anyone in this place. I have no family, no nation, no people who can claim my allegiance. My human race is dead, and I am the last. I am free of everything. I have no responsibilities to anyone, so I call myself free. By that right, I challenge you." A loud cheer erupted from the crowd. Grak was going to kill each and every one of them personally with his claws through the gut. That would be the most painful way to go. He had to fight the human now, or his leadership would be revealed as the lie that it was. Grak did not care for their freedoms, just his own to do as he pleased. But they had to think that they had freedom. That was the tricky part. "I accept your challenge, human. I will take great pleasure in removing your spine from the rest of your body." He leaned to the side and spoke to another of his aides. "Get me my flow." He straightened to his full 7.5 feet and stomped down the dais, the steps shuddering under the force. "Clear the floor," he shouted. The floor was cleared very quickly. A circle formed in the middle of the crowd, 50 paces wide across the center of the room. Grak stepped into this one side of the circle and removed his shirt and kicked off his boots, leaving him standing in his pants. His muscled form rose above the rest of the room, grey and hairless. He knew that he was an impressive sight. At 600 pounds of muscle and bone, Grak was the most powerful warrior of all the Free Fleet had at its disposal, and he had intended to remind them of the fact. The human stepped in on the other side of the ring and removed his coat, shirt, and boots as well. He was wearing a skin-tight white suit under his shirt, but he did not remove that. Grak could see the metal hand from across the ring. That would not do. By the right of the challenge, I decree that we shall fight with the nature that has given us. That means your glove there has not allowed. The human looked back at Grak. This is no glove. This is my hand. Grak had heard whispers of beings that had metal limbs, but he would not allow it. Were you born with it? He questioned the man. He shook his head. No, but I will not remove it. Got him. Are you saying that you refuse the terms and wish to forfeit? No, but I cannot fight with only one hand. Then you have a problem. Either you remove your hand, or I tell my fighters to kill your friends. The freak Jahan leaned in to speak to the human's ear. He listened and grudgingly nodded. Fine. The human reached up and grasped the metal hand and the ripping motion under the skin suit with an audible click. The human was left with a metal forearm on his right hand and a stump starting at the elbow. The Jahan stepped up and grasped the empty sleeve and cut it off at the shoulder. The human's muscled upper arm was pale and light, but it was a hole. The arm ended just below the elbow with a metal cap on the stump. He handed the dull grey arm to the diplomat. It was not so much as an advantage as Grak had been hoping for, but it would still be significant. He had not been worried in the first place, as the human was a good foot shorter than him, and was a great deal skinnier. He was a huge specimen when compared to the rest, but against Grak himself, he was still a child. Grak knew the man was fast, but he knew that he could move faster. His aide returned with his flow, mixed with a glass of water to disguise what it was. He drowned the drink and felt the effects immediately. The world slowed down around him, and his muscles swelled. He could hear the heartbeats of the beings next to him, and he could see the faint threads hanging from the human's torn sleeve. He was ready. He stomped into the center of the ring. The human did the same. Grak stared down into the human's bright green eyes. He did not see a trace of fear in them. He was either very brave or very stupid. It did not matter. This fight would only end one way. Are you ready to die, human? No, I am ready to kill. With that, Grak swung his arm down with a roar, feeling the flow energize the limb and send it speeding down into the human's face. The human dodged to the side, rolling and regaining his feet. He was fast, Grak gave him that, but Grak was faster. With another roar, he charged at the human's, arms outstretched. The human jumped, placing a foot on Grak's arm and leaping over the charging mass. Impossible! But he had done it. Grak grew angry. He knew it was the flow, but he did not stop himself. The human was taunting him. Grak would show him what happened to those who taunted a warlord. He came in slow, arms spread wide like before. There was no way the human was going to be able to get out from him this time. The human charged him. Grak smiled, his teeth showing. As soon as the human got within arm's reach, Grak grabbed him, and the human slid to the side to avoid Grak's grasp. But he had been expecting that and swung his arm the other way and caught the human in the chest, scoring 4 long slashes down his chest. They started to drip blood, a red broth spreading across the white suit. The human jumped back out of the Grak's reach. Grak pressed onward, keeping the advantage. He lunged at the human's left, his weak side. There was a missing arm. The human could not defend himself, and Grak felt a sharp pain in his hand as he pulled back. The human had used the metal-covered stump to strike Grak on the hand. He flexed. Nothing broken, just it stung a bit. The flow washed the pain away. Grak swiped his hand down again, aiming for the human's head. The human dodged it as before, but Grak was ready again. The human dodged Grak's left fist and met his right full on. He was flying crashing into the ground and a couple yards away. Not as far as he should have flown, but far enough. Grak leapt into the air and sailed down on the human, landing on one leg on either side of the human. He swung his fist down on the human's face, looking to end the fight as soon as possible. If it had connected, the human would have been dead. But it didn't. The human twisted in a way to make Grak's eyes struggle to follow him and snaked out from under the erg. He slipped up behind Grak and punched him in the back. Grak felt as though he had been shot by a rifle at close range. He collapsed to his knees, putting his arms out to steady himself. After a couple seconds, the flow washed away the pain. Grak lashed out with his leg, forcing the human to jump out of the way. He stood and faced his opponent with a due respect. It took a great deal of force to hurt an Erg, but this human had managed it. It did not matter, as Grak would see this human's head separated from his body. But the human seemed to have other plans. He came in swinging, his one arm moving fast enough for two. The flow allowed Grak to block them with ease. Had he been without the flow, it would have made things difficult, but the flow let him see and react to the strikes much faster. The human was fast, forcing Grak to use both of his hands to block his one-handed attacks, but he would soon tire. Grak was sure of it, but the human's speed increased. His fist flew at a speed greater than Grak had ever seen before. He was forced to react faster and was soon retreating from the human in order to keep him up with the swings. Grak could not attack. It was all he could do to defend. This was not the way it was supposed to be. The Grak was bigger, stronger, faster than any other being, and that was without flow. With the performance-enhancing drug, he should have been able to wipe the human in a bloody smear across the ring. But he almost couldn't defend against the one-armed fighter. What was happening? To Grak's horror, the human swung faster, his fists a blur even to the Grak's flow-enhanced eyes. He desperately tried to stop the blows, and he couldn't. They fell with such a speed that Grak could do nothing. He blocked several of them, but most got through. Pain erupted from his arms, and the human brought his fist crunching down on the nerve endings. Grak felt his right arm go numb. The flow rushed through his veins, stunning the pain, but it was coming so fast that it couldn't get rid of it entirely. Then the human struck with his metal-capped arm. The force of that blow landed squarely on Grak's left forearm, and he felt the bone shatter. How was that possible? He had only half an arm, but he managed to break Grak's bones, some of the thickest in the galaxy. The human spun on his left leg, sending a right leg crashing into Grak's chest. It felt like a ship had just crashed into him. Grak fell backwards, the flow, what was left of it, making it seem like it fell for minutes. He crashed down on his back on the floor, shook. His vision dimmed for a moment, and when it returned, Clint Stone was standing over him, his foot raised. "Looks like I'm the warlord now." His foot came down, and the Grak felt a flash of pain in his forehead, followed by nothing. I stood, my jaw open, as I watched Clint walk away from the Erg's body. I'd seen Clint fight the Doinf gang. I'd seen him fight for Kroort. I'd seen him fight 500 swarm from the back of a dragon. What I'd seen then paled before what I'd just seen. Clint had moved so fast that I could not see his arm, and he had defeated an Erg. One jumped up on Flo, with one arm. The rest of the spectators were silent in awe of what they had just seen. I blinked, and Clint was now standing in front of me. He asked Lady Knight, who was just as slack-jawed as the rest of us. "Huh? Oh, sorry," she said as she gave him an arm. Clint took it from her and pressed it into his stump. It clicked, and the metal flowed up his arm until it encompassed the whole arm again. He drew a deep breath and walked up to the dire steps, the crowd parting wordlessly in front of him. He stood in front of the bronze throne that had, until recently, belonged to the Erg. He stood in front of it and faced the crowd. "I am your new warlord. Do any of you wish to challenge me?" He was met with silence. "Very well, I do not have any interest in ruining you. You are free beings. You are free to leave if you wish. But those of you who remain will do so under leadership of Narachal LaRush. You will be my steward. Any deep issues will be brought to me, but I trust Narachal will do a fine job. We are going to join the rebellion. Those of you who think that this is enslavement, you are free to leave. But those of you who stay, we will become truly free, which is freedom. Fleeing from a threat, or allowing it to decide where you can and cannot go. Or is it to fight back, forcing the threat to bow to you? That is what we will be doing. We will free the galaxy from the greatest threat to freedom that it has ever known. And in freeing them, we shall truly free ourselves. It was not a very impressive speech, as they go, but the emotion and the conviction emanating from Clint were more than enough to make up for it. He finished speaking and walked down the stairs towards us. The crowd did not close around him, leaving several yards on either side of him. He reached us. "Let's go," he said. He looked at Azrekahl. "I'll be in touch." We found our gunbolts and collected Karis's body, and we boarded the Golden Hound and left for Aldemir. End of chapter. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. If you wish to support the author, there is a link to the original story, so pop over there and give him your support. If you wish to support this channel, however, there are a few ways to do so. The best and easiest would be to share this video with other people, as well as liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. All of these things tell the algorithm that this channel is at least vaguely interesting, and that may share it with other people. If you wish to support the channel in some other manner, watching my other videos would also help tremendously. Or, if you really like, there is a link down below to leave a tip, or to join the Patreon. Any and all support is very much appreciated. And I hope that you all have a good one until the next time, and I'll see you then. Cheers.